Hello! When I started thinking about making these videos, I noticed a stark lack of tutorials for beginners. Full disclosure, I am not a professional. I don't make models for clients, or sell or donate to museums. I am, for all intents and purposes, new to modelling. The aim of this, and following videos, is to be accessible to new modellers, while hopefully being entertaining enough for fully or partly experienced modellers alike. I'll try my best to explain all options you may have in any given activity, wherever possible, including the benefits and pitfalls. For example, I use professional tools, mostly, which are costly and might not be suitable for everyone, especially a beginner, but I feel they are worth the investment because of X, but you could also do Y or Z. With that, let's get to the opening of the model itself, the 172 Academy F15E. So this is what a typical model box will look like. I'm sure even beginners all know the deal. They will all look different, with different branding and different information. The ultimate goal here is to entice you to buy that model. But there is some interesting information to find. The scale, this is the size of the model. This one is 172 or 1 in 72, however you want to say it, which means this particular model is 72 times smaller than the actual thing. People typically tend to find one or two scales that they like and stick to them, but you don't have to if you don't want to. I should say this is not the first time I've had this model open. I did open it once, a while ago, to make sure it was all intact when it was delivered. I did my best to pack it back in as it were, but you never get them back in as they were. I'll explain a few terms as I go along too. One you may hear quite often and think, what on earth does that mean? Is sprues. Sprues are the cages of sorts that connect all the parts of the model together and hold them in place. These are a necessary product of the manufacturing process created by injecting molten plastic into a mould to create the shapes that we use to build the model. This model, while it has some very good details, is not a very complicated model. There aren't millions of parts, and there aren't any hyper-detailed parts like that are photo etched, which is a more advanced technique we will talk about at a later date. One of the fun things about models, if you're a nerd like me, is the research. Any model you get is a good basis to start research on whatever vehicle you're working on. For example, you might be from a different country and want to do this model in your country's specifications. Maybe it would add different loadouts, different paint schemes. It might be that your country never had any F-15s, but you want to do it in your country's specification anyway. Though that's a fantasy setup, you may still want to make it as realistic as possible. You might need to research the paint scheme your country uses for strike aircraft. You might want to go what a lot of people would consider crazy and go for a unique paint scheme. Glue a strange set of weapon parts together. Really, it doesn't matter. It's what you want to do. But it's always a good excuse to expand your knowledge in any given subject. Anyway, onto the instructions themselves. These instructions are quite good, especially for beginners. It gives you lots of information, including paints you will need for the model, and their respective numbers from different manufacturers. So on the left there is a triangle with a number 8 in it. It means when we see a downwards triangle with a number 8 in it, we need to paint something gunship grey. For Umbral, that's number 125. For life colour it's UA022, and so on. This is obviously only a guide. Sometimes the instructions can be bad, sometimes the paints can be bad, sometimes you might be using a brand of paints it doesn't even mention. Sometimes you simply want to do your own thing. So that's something to take note of. This model also comes with nice clear instructions for what different symbols we might encounter mean. Cement parts, do not cement, repeat process, apply decals, add weight, use filler, cut away, optional parts, repeat for the opposite side, make a hole, be careful, and painting scheme number. I'm not familiar with this manufacturer, but I presume that means something that may need painting before the end of making the model may change colours depending on the paint scheme you go with. Which is actually a really nice touch for the manufacturer to add, because it's pretty rare you get instructions that are that clear. Back to the instructions. It's also very important to read through all instructions first. There's a lot of reasons for that. Chief among them is, although these instructions do tell you to paint and apply decals to the cockpit first, sometimes instructions don't. And if you follow it completely in order, you'll end up sealing the cockpit, then you go to paint the thing, but oh, you can't. There's a canopy in the way. That might seem simple, but for a new beginner, it may not be so obvious. I know it wasn't for me when I first started out. Sometimes there can be other problems with instructions. Order, printing errors, sometimes things are just missing. That's why it's always important to essentially build the model in your head first. And if you need to, annotate your instructions to help you remind yourself about any changes you will do. Thankfully, this one seems pretty good, so for now at least, no need. Another phrase you may hear often is tool or tooling. Well, what it means is that the tools that the machinery that the factory made the model uses. New tooling means that the factory uses new tools to make an updated model. This is typically true of all models, plastic kits, model trains, die-cast cars, so on. It intends to make the model better. What better means and whether they made it better or accidentally worse is down to each version of each model from each manufacturer. There's really no way of knowing without extensive research, but typically if someone recommends an old tooling of a model, it means an older version. It's usually because there's an issue with an up-to-date version of whichever model it is. So to start with, you will typically start in order. Here is part 1 of the build. As you can see, it shows you the Spruce set it belongs to, plus which number, E4, number 4 on sprue E, A31, number 31 on sprue A, so on. It instructs you on any painting that needs doing, or any decals that need doing. Always paint before applying decals, except in very specific circumstances. But whether you paint before you glue parts together is down to you. Painting it first may help get paint into tight areas. However, the glue may affect the paint you've applied, especially if the paint hasn't fully dried yet. Much like working out which order in which to put the model together, it's somewhat of a puzzle to work out. Typically, you will only have one decal sheet. In this case, we need decals 1 and 4 for step number 1. And on the decal sheet, that matches up. Normally, what we would do here is we would either paint the parts and then put the decals on and then glue them all together. Or you could put all the parts together first and then paint and then decals. However, I have something special in mind for this model, so I am not going to do it this way. However, I usually would. Short, sweet video, just going over the basics of preparing to start a model. I think we've covered a fair amount of information, and I hope you found it useful. And I also hope you'll join me next time where we'll be following the instructions and cutting from sprues. Okay then, take care, bye bye now.